By 1914, Europe was a powder keg, divided into two rival alliances. Let's break it down. On one side, you had the Triple Entente, France, Britain, and Russia. These three powers were united by one thing: their fear of Germany, Europe's rising superpower. On the other side was the Triple Alliance: Germany, Austria, Hungary, and Italy. Germany was terrified of being surrounded by enemies. Austria-Hungary was barely holding its empire together. And Italy? Well, Italy was just looking for a chance to grab some land. Germany felt trapped. France to the west, Russia to the east. Austria-Hungary was dealing with rebellions in the Balkans. And Italy was, well, just waiting for the right moment to switch sides. The Balkans were the powder keg of Europe. One spark, and the whole continent could explode. And that spark? It came in June 1914. But what was that spark? Well, that's where our story really begins. It was a sunny morning in Sarajevo. Archduke Franz Ferdinand, heir to the Austro-Hungarian throne, was visiting the city with his wife, Sophie. The streets were lined with crowds, but not everyone was there to celebrate. A group of young nationalists saw this as their chance to strike. Among them was 19-year-old Gavrilo Princip, a member of the Black Hand, a secret nationalist group. The first attempt failed. A bomb was thrown, but it missed the car. The Archduke's visit continued, but fate had other plans. Then, by sheer chance, the car stopped right in front of Princip. He didn't hesitate. Two shots rang out. The Archduke and his wife were fatally wounded. Princip was arrested, but the damage was done. This single act would set off a chain reaction that would engulf the world. The assassination made headlines across Europe. Austria-Hungary was furious and blamed Serbia for supporting the assassins. Tensions skyrocketed. What happened next would change the course of history forever. The assassination of Archduke Franz Ferdinand set off a chain reaction. One by one, the great powers of Europe began to mobilize their armies. Germany, fearing a two-front war, put its Schlieffen Plan into action. Their goal: to quickly defeat France by sweeping through neutral Belgium. Russia, bound by treaty to Serbia, mobilized its massive army to support its ally. Germany saw this as a direct threat and declared war on Russia. Britain, allied with France and bound by treaty to protect Belgium, had no choice but to join the fight. The British Expeditionary Force prepared to cross the Channel. Austria-Hungary, determined to crush Serbia, launched its invasion. But this local conflict was about to explode into a world war. Within weeks, Europe was at war. The Western Front stretched from the English Channel to Switzerland, while the Eastern Front saw clashes between Germany, Austria, Hungary, and Russia. What started as a regional conflict in the Balkans had now engulfed the world. The Great War had begun. By the end of 1914, the war had reached a stalemate. On the Western Front, soldiers dug in, creating a network of trenches that stretched from the English Channel to Switzerland. Life in the trenches was hell. Soldiers faced constant danger from enemy fire, disease, and the harsh conditions. They lived in fear of snipers, artillery barrages, and the dreaded order to go over the top. When the whistle blew, they had no choice but to charge into a hail of bullets and shells. The results were devastating. Thousands died in minutes, cut down by machine guns, artillery, and poison gas. The ground was littered with the dead and dying. Amid the horror, soldiers found solace in letters from home. These small pieces of paper were their only connection to the world they left behind. The trenches became a symbol of the war's futility and brutality. But this was only the beginning. As the war dragged on, both sides turned to new, terrifying weapons to break the stalemate. One of the most feared was poison gas. Chlorine gas, first used by the Germans in 1915, burned the lungs and blinded its victims. Mustard gas followed, causing horrific burns and blisters. Then came the tanks. These armored monsters were designed to crush barbed wire, cross trenches, and break through enemy lines. Machine guns, capable of firing hundreds of rounds per minute, turned the battlefield into a killing zone. Defending troops could mow down entire waves of attackers. Flamethrowers added another layer of horror, incinerating everything in their path. The war had become a laboratory for new ways to kill. These new weapons changed the face of war forever, but the cost was unimaginable. While soldiers fought on the front lines, civilians bore the brunt of the war's devastation. Entire towns were reduced to rubble, and millions were forced to flee their homes. On the home front, women stepped into roles traditionally held by men. They worked in factories, produced weapons, and kept economies running. Food and supplies were scarce. Rationing became a way of life, and hunger was a constant struggle for many families. Governments used propaganda to rally support for the war. Posters, newspapers, and speeches encouraged civilians to contribute to the effort.
I am sorry to say that your son is dead.
For many, The war brought unbearable loss. Families received telegrams informing them of a son, husband or father who would never return. By the end of the war, millions were dead. The world was forever changed, and the scars of the conflict would last for generations. On November 11th, 1918, the guns finally fell silent. After 4 long years of bloodshed, the armistice was signed and the war was over. Across the world, people took to the streets to celebrate the end of the war. For many, it was a moment of relief and joy. For the soldiers, it was a chance to return home. But for many, the scars of war, both physical and emotional, would never fully heal. In 1919, the Treaty of Versailles was signed, officially ending the war. But the harsh terms imposed on Germany would sow the seeds of future conflict. The war redrew the map of Europe. Empires collapsed and new nations emerged. But the peace was fragile, and the world would never be the same. The Great War claimed the lives of over 9 million soldiers and 7 million civilians. It left behind a legacy of loss, but also of resilience and remembrance. World War I was a turning point in history. It reshaped nations, redefined warfare, and reminded the world of the cost of conflict.